Greetings, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this Career Development Lab, Professional Development and Transferable Skills in Scholarly Publishing. I'm really happy to be with an outstanding group of speakers. We have Margaret Morchan from the American Geophysical Union, Shannon O'Reilly from Georgetown University Press, Pooja Telekacharla from the American Psychiatric Association Publishing, Randy Townsend from the American Geophysical Union, and Jasmine Wallace from the American Society for Microbiology. And I'll be your moderator. I'm John Warren with George Washington University. This came out of a workshop that we did earlier where we look at careers in scholarly publishing. I think if you ask 10 different people about their career in publishing, you'll have 10 different answers, 10 different trajectories. So we're not going to provide you with the definitive answers, but we're going to look at different positions, trajectories, and goals. We're going to look at the skills that are needed to succeed in scholarly publishing, how publishing has shifted somewhat from a trade to a profession. We'll examine what the value of a master's in publishing or an MBA or another graduate degree can be, and we'll also look at how diverse voices and perspectives can be integrated into the system of publishing. So I'm going to not read the whole bios, but we've got, as I said, some outstanding speakers today. Dr. Margaret Morchan is a PhD astronomer, and she currently serves as director of AGU Journals at the American Geophysical Union. She has been with the Carnegie Institute of Science, an editor at Science, and has conducted postdoctoral work in observatories in Chile and elsewhere. Thank you for joining us, Margaret. And you can find her at Twitter at AstroMargaret, which is one of the best Twitter handles I've ever seen. Shannon O'Reilly is a digital publishing and rights manager at Georgetown University Press. She had been at the American Chemical Society. She recently graduated from the Master of Professional Studies in Publishing program at the George Washington University. Congratulations, Shannon. And she is on Twitter at Shannon O'Reilly. Pooja Telekacharla is licensing and subsidiary rights manager at the American Psychiatric Association Publishing. She was previously digital publishing and rights manager at Georgetown University Press. She also was at the University of Washington Press, Penguin, and the Brookings Institute. She's a yoga instructor and a pilot, and in her spare time serves as adjunct faculty in the Master of Professional Studies in Publishing program at the George Washington University. Randy Townsend is director of journal operations at the American Geophysical Union. He's worked there for more than 14 years. He also completed his degree at the George Washington University Publishing program in 2011. He's a member of the International Society for Managing and Technical Editors Programming Committee and serves as co-chair for the Society of Scholarly Publishing's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Jasmine Wallace is peer review manager at the American Society for Microbiology. She also graduated from the George Washington University Publishing program in 2014 and has served as a teaching assistant in the program. She's treasurer-elect of the Professional Development Committee of the Council of Science Editors. She is an outstanding chef for the Scholarly Kitchen blog, and you can find her on Twitter at JFRUMDAA. And as I said, I will be your moderator. I'm director and associate professor of the Master of Professional Studies in Publishing program at the George Washington University. And you can find me on Twitter at John_W_Warren. So we're going to start with questions for each of our panelists. And I'm going to start now with a question for Shannon. who, as I mentioned, you recently graduated from GW's Masters in Publishing program, and you also recently transitioned from working in marketing and outreach at ACS Publications to becoming digital publishing and rights manager at Georgetown University Press. So what are some of the reasons you decided to pursue your Master's in Publishing degree? And what do you feel is the value of a Master's in Publishing? And how has it informed your goals and your perspectives, especially as you transition into your new role at Georgetown University Press?
Thanks, John. So from working at ACS in the publications division, I knew I wanted a career in publishing, but I didn't know exactly where I fit. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about the industry, get exposure to different roles that make up publishing. And the GW Master's program was a really good fit for me, especially with my interest in academic publishing as well as society publishing. So with the Master's, I was able to meet people across the industry, as well as learn about different roles in things like editorial, production, marketing, across the entire board. And with that, I was able to learn a bit about what my interests are and where they align with publishing, but also meet new people and network. And it actually connected me with people for my current job at Georgetown University Press. So it was a great way to get a better idea of the publishing industry, but also to make myself feel more confident in my new role. I'm in rights management right now, which is something completely new for me. And based on the information I learned from my classes, it gave me the confidence to really be able to step up and take on this new role. All right, so Margaret, you led AGU journals and were previously an editor at Science, and you also manage programs at the Carnegie Institution for Science. So you've come into publishing with the perspective of a distinguished researcher. How has coming into publishing from your previous role as a researcher and writer informed your perspective as a director of AGU journals? And what lessons are important for publishers to know from the research and writer perspective? And what lessons are important for researchers and writers to know from the publisher's perspective?
Thanks, Shannon. That's a good question, and I think I still feel like an early career person in publishing, even if I'm not early career globally. And so all the lessons that I've learned, I feel like, are what publishers should be thinking about. Researchers don't know on the other side of the table. So when I was working as a scientist, to me, getting articles published was fairly transactional, and I didn't know a lot about the publishing process at all. And I think that's probably true for a lot of scientists who are very busy doing all of their research and teaching and whatever else. And even if they care deeply about their publications, don't really understand more about the process than the fact that peer review happens and then eventually something gets published. So for me, it was learning to communicate as much as possible with the authors about what's going on, to try to make sure that, like, putting on fresh eyes every now and again, looking at our guidelines and seeing, is this clear to someone who doesn't know all the things that we know? And then, like, trying to put ourselves in the researcher's shoes, thinking, what do they want out of this? I mean, apart from getting the publication, do they really want to promote this article? How can we work with them on that? And so I think trying to open the science, in our case, science, the author community's eyes to some of the processes on our side, and not just taking for granted that they know how publishing works. Let's see, was that? And then for researchers and writers, I think it's important to understand, and we're trying to build awareness of this, but that we're on their side. When there are delays, inevitably, in things, we try to communicate about why things are happening, but ultimately, we're trying to achieve the same goals. And so if I could convey to them to have a little patience, try to learn more about what's going on the publishing side, then everybody works better together. And at least for AGU, our editors do a really good job of bridging that gap between the publisher and the community. And I know Randy might talk a little bit more about that too. Now I have a question for Pooja. So Pooja, you have demonstrated considerable geographic and publishing sector diversity in your career, it including trade, research, university press, and now association publishing. So how has this range of perspectives influenced your career?
Thanks, Margaret. In many ways, my experience echoes both yours and Shannon's, where Shannon's reflected going from one specific department kind of work in publishing to another, going from marketing and outreach to rights, and yours going from being a producing scholar to being one who helps develop and refine scholarly work. My moving around from a number of university presses and now an association press, which did include brief stints at a think tank and a trade house, really opened my eyes to all the possibilities where very similar challenges and problems can be solved with a great variety of problem-solving mechanisms, and what versions of things work in trade houses can be adapted to also be really dynamic and useful in places that are more scholarly or would otherwise not necessarily have access to those ways of approaching an issue because it, quite frankly, was different from how folks have always been doing it. And so, you know, it wasn't intentional for me at the time. It wasn't part of my career plan to move around so much, but it really helped me have an unsiloed perspective on both my own career and then those with whom I work and develop and mentor and train, to give them access to a variety of different ways of approaching problems and solutions, which often very much includes working across departments and developing the language and the skills to communicate effectively with colleagues in marketing and to be able to understand the concerns and needs of colleagues in editorial so that we can, as comprehensively as possible, work as a team in a way that really moves a project forward. So something I really enjoy about what we all have in common in this group is that variety manifests in a lot of really productive ways professionally. This brings me to a question that I've actually wanted to ask Randy myself anyway, and I'm thrilled that he's here with this group. And so Randy, you have always been at the forefront in a lot of diversity and inclusion efforts, which have become especially more prominent even in the last few months in the publishing community, both scholarly and trade. So my question to you is, how do you have real, measurable, actionable, progress in this development and not just kind of talk about it? Because a lot of folks, it is aspirational thinking, but you have demonstrated experience in making it happen. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Thanks, Pooja. So first, I know I'd like to say that it's important to have the talk, the difficult conversations that really starts, and sometimes you have to have those difficult conversations over and over again to the point where everybody in the room is uncomfortable. Uncomfortable is good, because if everybody's comfortable in these conversations, then you're not driving it in the right direction. Just think of how uncomfortable some of your colleagues may be in rooms where they're the only ones that look like themselves, where they're the unicorns in the room. So having these uncomfortable conversations for everybody is how you move to an area where everybody becomes comfortable. So, I don't want to underscore the importance of talk and conversations. And talk purposefully. Talk to your colleagues, talk to your members, talk to your authors. Understand what your story is. If you have a low participation in your editorship and doesn't reflect diversity, have that conversation. Find out why. Find out where the people are that can contribute and that should contribute. It's important to know that Black and Brown people are not just experts in DE&I related topics, they're experts in their field. We come to scholarly publishing or related industries because we have a passion, we have a talent, we have a skill, and that skill and talent should be nurtured. So find out ways to nurture those, and that's through those difficult conversations that makes everybody uncomfortable. Think about your activities and where you're lacking. Think about when you're in a room, who's missing and why are they missing, and how can we get them to the table? I think the research really proves that things are better when you have a more diverse representation and more diverse participation. So find out ways to reach out to those communities that may not know that scholarly publishing is an industry that they can explore and they can find comfort and satisfaction and purpose, not just because they're Black and brown, but because they can contribute. And then I think really have better discussions and can really drive the industry in an amazing direction. In terms of mentorship, I've been very fortunate, and I think I have so many mentors, whether they knew they were my mentors or not. They became my mentors because I knew that they were experts and they had value in what they had to say, and I wanted to soak it all up. So I would listen to conversations, I would join conversations, to the point where people just got used to me being around and asking questions and looking for my questions, and ready to be challenged by my questions, and vice versa, challenge me on their questions. And I really enjoy turning around and having those same conversations with people that are coming up in their careers. I've served as a mentor for SSP. They have a fantastic mentorship program. I think several other organizations have mentorship programs too. I encourage you to explore those options if you want to mentor or you're looking for a mentor. They're just a wealth of experience and conversations that are just waiting to open up more doors. And now I have a question for Jasmine. Jasmine, you are now what might be called a mid-career trajectory as peer review manager at ASM. What have you found to be the value of a master's in publishing degree, and how have you used what you learned as a rising publishing professional? And how have you planned a career path that's intentional with defined goals and aspirations, yet that still allow for flexibility, change, and serendipity?
Thanks, Randy, for the question. Let me back up because I know this is going to be something that probably early career professionals are watching. I want to start by like setting definitions of what early career professional is and mid-level, because I had to do that for myself, like what constitutes mid. So apparently, having done my research, 1 to 10 years makes you early career. So Margaret, you said you're in that space of early career for this new space. I think that's very true. Mid-career is 10 to 25 years. So that's the range of where I am now. And then past that, you're more seasoned professional. So I had to do that because I wanted to take a step back to think about, okay, what was useful for me when I started going into publishing and my master's in publishing. I sat back and I said, I was an early career professional. And the first thing I did was, something that I found very valuable in the long run that I did even before applying. Rainey, you hinted on this, is finding a mentor. I think that was one of the most valuable things that the program did for me. I like to think the networking is everything, which I still think is my solid number one, similar to Shannon. But a very close second, if not almost surpassing it, was this idea of having to reach out to people who I felt uncomfortable to talk to, ask them information about where and how I should move forward. I reached out to two people, of course, to get recommendations for the program, and it caused me, in the sense of this discomfort, it was very uncomfortable for me to reach out to these individuals, but it trained me to do that throughout the entire process of my degree. And as I moved through it, I found a lot of mentors. I found a lot of people who now I use as resources, who have been advocates for me, who've been allies and sponsors in ways. And so that's something so valuable that I wouldn't have had otherwise, I think, if I did not attend the program. Of course, the learning was, supreme. But I think, like, when I'm looking back over this and as I'm moving forward in this mid-year, trajectory of my own career, I want to be that person for someone else if possible. Um, and when people come to me and they have questions for me, I think this might be very hard for them to do. So I like to keep that at the forefront of my thinking. Um, and as I guess when you think about, this idea of what I found, how I've been intentional with my career, um, I've been intentional in the sense that that is a purpose that I've given myself, not just for, my career, but for my life as in its entirety. Um, and when I think about intentionality, I think about it as having a plan, setting a direction, but allowing for some flexibility in the midst of that plan. So, in intentionally planning, your career, I think it should include space for pivot moments. For myself, that's what I've allowed to happen along the way. Like, I said, this is what I want to do, and I walked that path. But as I walked that path, there spurred a lot of different opportunities. And because of those opportunities, I think that's how I started to even redefine some of my goals for myself. And I think that really well developed plans kind of allow for that flexibility, like they're built into that. It's knowing like when to take a class, when to go to a certain or particular meeting, who to speak to. That's a part of the intentionality of the planning. But I think more than anything, it's just allowing yourself to have room to just take on any given opportunity. I think when you don't really define where you're trying to go, it's almost impossible to get there. So if you're at the start of your career, I think that's difficult to define that space. But if you just say one step ahead, if it's joining a professional organization and that's the desire that you have, that's a step, that's a plan, and just be intentional about going to the meetings. And when you get there, allow room for, speaking to other people and that serendipity to happen, that ooh wow moment that only comes in that space. And as I think about that, I think about mentorship and things like that. John, I know that your role has been to develop new leaders and managers in publishing. So, what do you think, I guess, are some of the key skills needed for successful careers in publishing in the next, say, 10 years or more, maybe less? I don't know. These days, you never know. And how are these skills needed for today and in the coming years may be different from each other? Like how did they start being one way and maybe they've evolved into something different?
Thank you, Jasmine. Yeah, it's great. It's great seeing you and Randy and Shannon and all the students, really succeeding in publishing. When I think about it, I've been in publishing now for almost 30 years. So I guess I am in that senior capacity that you mentioned. And I think publishing has always changed. It's always changed. It's always going to be changing. But that pace of change seems to be faster and faster. So, we don't really know what's going to happen over the next 10 years or certainly the next 20 years. So I think, knowing how to learn and how to continuously improve your skills and your talents is really crucial. When I entered into publishing, metadata didn't really exist. It sort of existed. People made catalogs, but there weren't, databases as we know them today. And now you can have a career as a metadata specialist or metadata professional. I think, one of the things that we try to do in the publishing program at GW is teach people the entire business. And one thing that I hear from alumni that has been really important, that you don't just learn editorial or you don't just learn marketing, but you learn things like accounting, you learn technology, you learn editorial, you learn production. People don't usually come into the publishing program necessarily thinking of becoming production managers, but they have classes in production and decide to go that route. So kind of learning the whole business, and as Pooja said, not being siloed, I think that really helps you, even if you specialize in an area, if you know different parts of the business. And for me, I think one thing that's been important, and I do try to instill this in the students, and I think most of our professors do, is having both kind of creative and analytical approaches, and not just relying on, like, I'm a creative person, I'm not analytical, or I'm very analytical and not creative. I think you really need to do both. So those are just a few things that could go on, and we could probably have a whole thing just on this. In fact, that's going to be our next question, is for everybody here, is what are the skills, what are the top 3 to 5 skills that have been most critical in your career, and how transferable are they for different publishing careers? And how do you recommend that somebody go about acquiring these skills or continue to develop them? So I don't think we really have necessarily an order for this. Who wants to take a first stab?
I think mine might be the most generic, so I don't mind going first. I'm building largely on what Jasmine said. I think I would echo like 100% of what she said about allowing yourself to have pivots and being prepared for that and learning new skills. So for me, I think I would say it's 2 skills that have been critical. One is identifying what you don't know when there's a knowledge gap. This especially is, it's easy to find out when you have seen a position that maybe you want that sounds exciting, and then you look at what you ought to know, or you talk to people who know the job and you find out, aha, but I don't know thing X. And then, so having the skill to know what you don't know is one thing, and then the flip side of that is being able to fix it. So like Jasmine said, identifying whether that's attending a webinar or taking a class online or talking to someone, know what works for you, but you should be prepared to not have it fed to you on a silver platter, that once you know that you need to learn some skill or area or topic or domain, figure out what it takes to bone up on that. And again, like Jasmine said too, that may mean reaching out to people that you don't know, but most people are kind-hearted and happy to share their knowledge with you and even feel really good about it. So I think learning how you learn best and remembering to do that on a regular basis has been what's most useful for me. And I think it's highly transferable, of course.
Thanks, Margaret.
Yeah, I would just say adaptability. Sorry for the AG folks to just jump up in and run with these questions. But John, you mentioned it, you really hit it right on the head when you mentioned things are changing at such a rapid pace. And, as much as you can learn, if you just learn it for tomorrow, you're going to be lost next week. So you really have to get that solid framework down. And this goes to my education in the master's program. It gave me such a solid foundation that I can see the frameworks and then adapt as you see things starting to change or starting to evolve. You can be 2 or 3 steps ahead of that evolution, and be better prepared even for the unexpected. You're more prepared if you have an understanding of the way things should work, and then connect those dots in new and uncharted territories.
And just a quick comment to give an example of that, like when I came into this position at AGU, something that was getting really big news and still is the open access push. Of course, I think we knew what open access was, but the whole landscape was changing, the rules were changing, how people operated their business models was changing, and so there's not a Wikipedia page about that, but it can be learned, and that's one concrete example of something that, like Randy says, one has to be adaptable with and learn on the fly often.
I would love to add something to that question, though it doesn't quite fit the criteria of a top skill. It's certainly one of my favorite things that I've learned in my career so far, which is uncovering where things become personal in a good way. And an example of that is at a launch meeting, which is something that happens, I think, across all of the presses that we represent in this discussion, whether it's a journal or an article or a project, a book project, is I love asking the editors and the people who developed the project and brought it to the table what they love about it. And I love leading with that kind of information when I go to pitch the rights at a book fair, for example, or if I go into a marketing capacity. I love knowing what personal human connection people have with the projects that they bring and why and how that particular book or journal or author or set of authors really takes an idea further forward, so that we can, in addition to being unsiloed from our tasks, we can also be less transactional in many ways around the things that we produce and the content we produce. It tends to be a moment when I've seen a lot of editors kind of turn their head and their eyes light up, because I'm asking them really about their heart and less about the marketing plan. So that's been one of my favorite kind of skills to cultivate in my career.
I guess I'll jump in there. I like that everyone mentioned a lot of soft skills, not as much hard skills. I think that shows a transition in all our workplaces that we're leaning more on sort of this emotional intelligence and understanding of selves. So as I say that, I will add my comment of I like to think of one skill that I really value and I learned years ago. I think I'm still mastering is vulnerability. I always think that, if you're not, ask those questions that you're afraid to ask. And I think that is key and critical to what helps you really be able to, move along in this space. I think because we have so many silos, as Pooja described, informational silos, data silos, organizational silos, they're just going to keep popping up. And I know we're all aware of them. I think like humbling yourself into a space of saying, okay, I don't know, I'm afraid, I want to know more. How do I do that? And another skill, I know you said 3 to 5, John, we've all been kind of doing 1 or 2, but it's time management. And I say that as a skill that's imperative. Again, something else I'm very much still trying to master. I think it's really critical because a lot of our organizations are on time constraints in one way or another. But then life comes into play. And in order to really be successful, you may have to take on volunteer work or volunteer opportunities. So it really requires you to master your schedules and your own time so that you have enough time to do everything you may want or want or not want to do. And I think that's one of those skills that's transferable in any space that you move in any of our areas.
I think for me too is being flexible, but also recognizing the skills that you do have and how those can transfer. When I first saw my position as a rights manager for Georgetown, my initial thought was, I can't do that, I'm not qualified. But as I started looking through, I was like, wait a second, like some of these bullet points, although they not be word for word what I'm doing now or what I've done in the past, there are things that I can bring to the table. For instance, at my role at ACS, I was in publishing, but I was planning events, and I planned 40 events in 1 year in 19 different countries. And that required a ton of organization and a ton of time management and a lot of being detail oriented. And all of that worked really well for a job that's looking at metadata and managing digital assets, but also talking to a lot of international customers. And so that's just something I want to bring up too, is think a little bit also about everything that you've done and the skills you do have, and be confident in those skills that you can bring them to a different role, especially now when we're required to be more flexible and you may end up in an area that wasn't somewhere you were before. So that's something I would bring up.
Thanks, everybody. So I already mentioned having both a kind of creative and analytical approach, and I mentioned like knowing how to learn new things, which I think is really important. A couple other skills that I think are very important, at least in my career, has been the ability to develop strategic partnerships, and these are often friendships as well. I have a hard time separating the two. Sometimes it could just be a partnership without a friendship, but usually it's a friendship as well. And as everybody in publishing knows, it's generally a friendly space. But being able to really develop partnerships that advance your own strategy, and also being able to bring people together that maybe don't even help yourself, just introducing people that you think can benefit. That has its own benefits down the road. Another skill, I guess it's a skill, it's actually kind of a collection of skills, is what you might call continuous improvement or process improvement. And this is sometimes called Six Sigma techniques, and you could even get a black belt in it, which I don't have. But a lot of these skills, such as doing a process map or doing other types of strategic prioritization exercises, can be really beneficial in a given area. Somebody in a previous workshop that we did on this topic mentioned pivot charts in Excel, and I don't know if I would be so detailed as to say pivot charts, but knowing your way around Excel really well can be of help. And I think these things, I think everything that everybody's mentioned is very transferable. So let's see, we have had a great conversation so far, and we have just a few more questions. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to ask Randy this one. Randy, from your perspective, has publishing shifted from a trade, a sort of apprenticeship that you mostly learn on the job, to what you might call a profession, like learning and applying a body of relevant skills and best practices?
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely moved from a trade to career and profession, just because of the disruption, the volume of disruption that publishing is undergoing and has been undergoing for quite some time. Margaret touched on open access, an example, and that's changing business models altogether. You have certain organizations that are driving change, and different society publishers or different scholarly publishers have different processes already, and some can weather some of these changes. Some are completely unprepared for them and need to have discussions on multiple levels. So coming into it with your skills as a profession, as a career, as a professional, there's just so many different opportunities to contribute to these kinds of changes. And that's not even to underscore the technological changes and the societal changes and the behavioral changes and the way that people uh, they experience content and information, how they engage with audiences. So many different things are changing and evolving. Social media as a tool and as an instrument, to give life to scholarly articles and published content. There's just so much out there, and so many opportunities for people to contribute and apply their skills, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in accounting, whether it's in production. There's just a lot of opportunities, and absolutely, to the bottom line, ends with as it starts. Yes, it's definitely opportunity, as a profession to approach scholarly publishing in that way.
Thank you, Randy. Let's go to Shannon. You did kind of mention this a little bit earlier, as you transition from working in association publishing to university publishing, university press publishing. How have you used networking to enter this field, and how has your previous experience informed what you're accomplishing now at Georgetown?
Yeah, so networking has been huge for me. I've gone on, before the pandemic, a lot of coffee dates, and now I've done a lot of virtual coffee dates as well, not only to get a position, but also to just learn more about how I can be better in my role. I mentioned rights management is really new to me, so I've taken time in my first couple months on the job to interview other rights managers at different university presses to figure out what they're doing, what some of their challenges are, some of their tips. Networking, shouldn't be done when in desperation, I believe, but should be done constantly. So you should always be talking to people, going out for coffees, having virtual meetings, getting involved locally. Not only will that help you in your next step, but it'll just help you in your own profession as well. And it's also really important for developing mentors as well. One of my favorite networking tips is whenever I go to an SSP meeting, I jot down one or two notes on the back of a business card so I can follow up with them on LinkedIn and make it personal after the end of that, and make sure I set up an actual next step or meeting with them. So it's not just, you have 500 connections, but you have 500 connections you're using, frequently, but also occasionally to learn and grow your own skill set. And one of those connections has been huge for me has been Pooja, and she's been a mentor for me. So I'd love to ask Pooja the next question. So Pooja, you're a member of the faculty in the GW Publishing Master's Program and was my professor for rights management. You've also been very engaged and involved in the publishing community, participating in and chairing AU Presses committees, for example. What have these experiences meant for your career, and how do you recommend younger professionals get involved, and what lessons would you impact from your experiences?
I'm so glad that I have had the opportunity to be a positive influence on you, Shannon, in a variety of ways, because that very much speaks to what John said about these relationships being personal and also professional. And I'm sure you'll find, especially in the university press rights world, it's an extremely welcoming group of folks who are always happy to hang out and share notes. That said, joining committees has been a really instrumental piece of my personal development as well as career, because it has exposed me very productively to people at other presses with different realms and bodies of experience, usually around collaborative group work, which if you recall high school, or at least I can, group work wasn't always the most meritocratic society, but when it comes to these committees, it can be a really effective way to learn about what other presses are doing and how. And in my case, I also joined a library committee, so I could work with librarians who I think in the SSP world, librarians and scholarly publishers really serve a lot of the same audiences. So being on committees is a really wonderful way to strengthen and develop your career. It also helps you refine a skill that Jasmine referred to as time management. If your committees demand more time or resources than you're able to allocate, it helps you really refine how you can create space for learning and development in your world while also maintaining your responsibilities with whatever your primary role is. So my advice for folks who are starting out and want to take meaningful steps to go beyond just a business card exchange into something more personal is to participate in committee work and see where you can lend a hand in groups that might be a little bit different. So if you're in marketing, maybe see if you can join a journals or a tech committee, and if you're in rights, maybe work with a digital committee. So where there's overlap in your skill set, you can really deepen your knowledge. Back to you, John.
Okay, thank you. So let's turn to Margaret. We talked a little bit about this, but I think it's worth exploring a little bit more. You're the only one of us that's really been a true scholar that's gone into the publishing side. So what skills and tools have you learned that's been most important in shifting from being a scholar to somebody who now supports and amplifies scholars? Not that you're not still a scholar, because you always will be. And as a publisher, what advice would you have provided to your younger scholar self?
Let's see. So the skills I think I've learned from being on the scholar side, and then trying now to support and amplify them from the publishing side, is that I knew as a scholar, I was an astronomer. I knew very well the channels of information flow that astronomers used, and I also knew that unfortunately what still counts for a lot of scholars is getting those publications on your CV, and so it often didn't. Publishing didn't need to go past that transaction because I've got the line, that's it. The people that I need to read it are going to read it. Like, I know who they are. It's, under a dozen people. But that was it. And I think both things are different now and perhaps could have been different then. So for me, as the publisher side, what's important to learn is what channels of information do the scholars that we're interacting with use most frequently? Like, are they preprint servers? Like, what's the currency for them? Does something not count until it's past preprint level? Do they get on social media a lot? Like, where is their community interaction? And then trying to tap into that from the publication's content side so that their articles have the most value, that it's not just a line on the CV, but it matters a lot more. Because I think if it just, gets the Merchant et al. on someone's resume, then there's a big opportunity loss. And so I see that as a big service that we as publishers can provide to the scholars to help them find that mesh, like getting the content into more useful places for them. And I've learned, like working at Carnegie with biologists for the first time, number one, that I knew nothing about biology, but two, that biologists shared their content in a totally different way than physical scientists. So that was very eye-opening. To find out where people shared things and how and what they considered legitimate and not. So I think being aware of that as a publisher is important. And I don't know that I would have any specific advice for my younger scholar self, because I didn't have this was not my plan. I mean, it's great where I am now, but I don't have 3 steps ahead plan. So I think I would advise any sort of early career researchers like my younger self just to be a little bit bold and fearless and try to get jobs that sound exciting to you, even if you don't think you're qualified for them, because you might learn more about the role and find out that it doesn't sound as exciting, or you might meet people, like Shannon said, that become your mentors. Networking for people who are more introverted like me is extremely painful, but if you just work up the courage to just send the email, then you find yourself on the coffee date, or now virtual coffee date, and things tend to snowball from there. So step a little bit out of the comfort zone when possible. And if you're not qualified for the job, someone else can tell you that, but don't talk yourself out of it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I'm glad Shannon mentioned the virtual coffee date, because that's something I've been talking to my students a lot about recently. So let's see. I guess I don't know if did we skip Jasmine in this round? That was inadvertent if we did. Maybe we'll actually I'll give this one to Jasmine. How has publishing from your perspective shifted from a trade or apprenticeship to a profession where one learns and applies a body of relevant skills and best practices?
I'm mad I'm being put on the spot for this question, but it's okay because I totally love this question. Um, One, it has definitely shifted, and I think some people aren't correlating that in our spaces. So I'm glad that we're addressing this in this conversation. I think some people still treat our profession like it is a trade, by which you only learn one skill and you don't do anything else for the remainder of your career. So I think that's one of the biggest ways, or how it's shifted from being this trade apprenticeship, pass on knowledge, which we still do, but learned skills, to this profession. I think the development of the program for George Washington is one of those examples. I remember when I was applying to the program, I looked at all the programs that were available. I was thinking of doing virtual programming and virtual schooling somewhere else. So I was open to the possibility. But when I looked, I realized there were a limited amount of schools that were actually offering publishing as a practice in the master space. And so I think that is one of the biggest things that shows that our field has moved from trade to this profession, because we've now defined it as far as a academic profession goes. We've defined it, and you can go to school for it, and there are things that we can learn and we can grow within that space. And I think that's super critical to where we're moving in our industry. And one of the things that has probably prevented us from moving as quickly as, say, other industries, because we've never been able to set standards and things like that on a higher level. So I think that this schooling, and as we move forward, I'm sure the program is going to get stronger and have more courses that are more like about policy development for all of publishing. And those are the type of things that I think you can only do in a well-defined program. And so that's my response to this question.
That's a good
Yeah.
suggestion, Jasmine. I appreciate that suggestion. Yeah, I'll echo some of the things that you said. When I got into publishing, I think almost like everybody in my generation that I know, it just kind of stumbled across it completely by accident, was not intending to get into publishing, and I'm glad I did. But it is definitely something I see in the students that we have in our program, that most of them, even those that have experience in publishing already, most of them were really intentional about that as a career, like seeking out a career in publishing, not just kind of falling into it and learning it. And I think you're right, Jasmine. We always will learn on the job. It's essential, but I don't think it's enough. And the kind of older way of just sort of learning your job, you didn't really learn all the pieces of the business typically, although I'm sure that happened to some people, but it probably wasn't typical. But I think it's really essential to understand all the different aspects of the business, including, as you said, setting policy and helping the next generation. So I don't know if anybody else wants to add to this, but I think we've had a really great conversation today. We have, I'm going to just show a few slides. We're not going to discuss these, but we have put together some recommended resources. This is not an exhaustive list, but some of us have suggested books or websites or other resources that might help other professionals in publishing, especially younger ones, but not exclusively younger ones. These are books that came as suggestions from all of us. And I want to thank everybody for participating today. I want to thank Margaret and Randy and Jasmine and Shannon and Pooja. I also want to thank Mary Beth Berea for SSP and Melanie Dolchak from SSP for facilitating this conversation today. And I want to thank everybody listening for your attention.